Okay, let's dive right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to be unpacking George Orwell's phenomenal 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language. Now, most of us probably know Orwell for his dystopian fiction, right? Things like 1984. But this essay explores a deeply practical, timeless argument. He suggests that sloppy language and sloppy thinking are actually trapped in this vicious cycle. So we're going to look at exactly how language decays, why politicians might actually want it that way, and most importantly, how we can fix it. So Orwell's core thesis here is just fascinating. He argues that people mistakenly treat language like a natural growth, something that just kind of happens to us, rather than a tool that we actively shape. Think of it like a feedback loop. A person might drink because they feel like a failure, and then fail even more because they drink. Well, similarly, Orwell states that our language becomes ugly because our thoughts are foolish, but then that sloppy language in turn makes it incredibly easy to just keep having foolish thoughts. It feeds itself. But here is the really crucial point. This decay is absolutely reversible. We are not doomed to some downward spiral. Modern English is full of bad habits that spread by imitation, sure, but if we're willing to actually put in the effort, we can consciously avoid them. Orwell argues that fixing our English is literally the necessary first step toward thinking clearly. And thinking clearly, well, that is our absolute best defense against political deceit. Let's look at Part 1, The Four Sins of Modern Prose. Staleness and lack of precision. Orwell diagnoses modern writing as a mix of vagueness and sheer incompetence, and he breaks this down into four main sins. The first one, dying metaphors. Now, a newly invented metaphor is great. It helps you think by giving you a really clear visual image. And a completely dead metaphor is fine too, because it basically just functions as an ordinary word at that point. But in between those two extremes is a massive dump of exhausted imagery. Writers use these worn-out metaphors simply because it saves them the mental effort of having to invent fresh, vivid phrases for themselves. You definitely know the ones he's talking about. Phrases like toe the line or Achilles' heel. People literally just gum these together. What's worse, half the time people use them without even knowing their true meaning. Orwell points out that incompatible metaphors are frequently mixed together in the exact same sentence, which is a surefire sign that the writer isn't actually visualizing what they're saying at all. Moving on to the second sin, which Orwell calls operators or verbal false limbs. This is the incredibly common habit of eliminating simple, punchy verbs like break, stop, or spoil. Instead, writers will pad their sentences with extra syllables and clunky noun constructions. They lean heavily on the passive voice to give their sentences this totally fake appearance of symmetry and profoundness. For example, instead of just saying break, a writer afflicted by this habit will say render inoperative. I mean, why use one syllable when you can use 7, right? Instead of stop, it becomes militate against. It takes a simple, clear action and just buries it under unnecessary fluff. Sure, it saves the writer the trouble of picking the right verb, but it completely exhausts the reader. The third sin, pretentious diction. This happens when bad writers, especially in politics and sociology, Orwell notes, are haunted by the notion that Latin or Greek words somehow sound grander than simple Anglo-Saxon ones. They use complex vocabulary to dress up very simple statements and to give this fake air of scientific impartiality to heavily biased judgments. Listen to words like epoch-making, utilize, or status quo. These words are frequently deployed to dignify the messy, sordid processes of international politics, or honestly just to sound cultured without doing any of the actual intellectual heavy lifting. The end result, Orwell says, is just a massive increase in slovenliness and vagueness. And finally, the fourth sin features meaningless words. In certain kinds of writing, like art criticism or political writing, words are so abused they literally mean nothing. You couldn't point to a real-world object that represents them if you tried. This is incredibly dangerous because it allows the user to completely hide their own private definition from the audience. Take words like democracy or freedom as prime examples. Orwell points out that a word like democracy actually has several totally unreconciled meanings. But because pretty much everyone agrees that being democratic is a good thing, defenders of every single kind of regime try to claim the title. Politicians use these words consciously and dishonestly to deceive listeners. They let the audience assume one meaning, while the speaker actually intends something completely different. Okay, let's jump into part 2, the translation test, concrete versus abstract. To really prove his point, Orwell conducts this brilliant little experiment. He takes a famous, vivid verse from Ecclesiastes, "I returned and saw under the sun, that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong," and he translates it into modern, abstract jargon. It becomes something like, objective consideration of contemporary phenomena compels the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity. I mean, wow. Notice how the concrete illustrations completely dissolve into this vague, 90-syllable mess without a single fresh phrase. So you have to ask, why has language become so vague? Why do we choose ready-made phrases instead of picking words for their actual meaning? Well, Orwell says the attraction is simple, it's easy, it saves mental effort. If you just throw your mind open and let the ready-made phrases crowd in, they will literally construct your sentences for you, but they do so at the immense cost of leaving your meaning completely vague, not only for your reader, but for yourself. Which brings us to part 3, defending the indefensible, the political motive. This is really the absolute heart of the essay, looking at the brutal historical realities of 1946. Orwell argued this wasn't just about laziness. No, there is a distinct political motive. To defend the indefensible, politicians rely on euphemisms and sheer cloudy vagueness. Bombarding defenseless villages, that's suddenly called pacification. Robbing millions of peasants of their farms, oh, that's just a transfer of population. This vague phraseology is absolutely necessary if a politician wants to name terrible things without calling up the mental pictures of those things in your head. Insincerity is the great enemy of clear language. When a politician's real aims clash with their declared aims, they instinctively turn to long words and exhausted idioms. As Orwell so perfectly puts it, they spurt out jargon like a cuttlefish spurting out ink to hide themselves. So let's turn to part 4, the cure. 6 rules for clear writing. If sloppy language leads to sloppy thinking, how do we fight back? Well, Orwell suggests a somewhat radical approach to writing. Put off using words for as long as possible. When you think of a concrete object, try to think wordlessly first. Let the meaning choose the word, rather than just surrendering to the existing dialect. Once you have the meaning clear through pictures and sensations, then you hunt for the exact words that fit. And finally, switch around to judge what impression those specific words will actually make on another person. Orwell leaves us with this screenshot-worthy checklist, 6 rules to rely on when your own instinct fails. First, never use a metaphor you are used to seeing in print. Second, never use a long word where a short one will do. Third, if it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Fourth, never use the passive where you can use the active. Fifth, avoid foreign phrases and jargon. And sixth, break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. Now, simplifying your language isn't about creating fake colloquialisms or pretending to be informal. It's much deeper than that. It is all about clarity. When you simplify your English, you literally can't speak the dialect of political conformity. If you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be completely obvious, even to yourself. It's a brilliant, everyday form of self-defense against propaganda. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. We all fall into these linguistic traps, every single one of us. But as Orwell showed us, we have the power to consciously change our habits. Take a hard look at the language you use at work, on social media, or just in daily conversations. What worn-out phrase, tired metaphor, or meaningless piece of jargon will you consciously scrap from your own vocabulary today? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep your words